Hi, I'm Asha, and what I saw that night still haunts me. My parents stood by my sister's grave, not to mourn, but to bury something. A small wooden box, no words, no tears, just silence and guilt. When they walked away, I ran toward it, barefoot, heart pounding. I dug through wet earth with shaking hands and whispered, "Please don't be empty." It wasn't. It held the one thing they never wanted me to find. And now, everything I believed about my family has turned to ash. Before we start, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I ask because time doesn't always move forward in stories like these. Sometimes it loops, and sometimes it digs up the dead. The air was colder than I expected for late May. It carried the smell of lilies, sweet, almost cloying, and something else underneath, like wet soil and rust. I stood behind the line of mourners gathered at Grace's grave, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp ground. The preacher's voice trembled through the static of the microphone, but I barely heard a word. My eyes were fixed on my parents. Mom's posture was perfect, back straight, chin slightly lifted, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Beside her, Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him, his fingers trembling as he lowered a small wooden box beside Grace's casket. His lips moved, maybe a prayer, maybe just breath. From where I stood, I could see the box, dark wood, about the size of a shoebox. It was the only thing he touched all day without being told to. When the choir started humming Amazing Grace, I tried to step forward toward the front row. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But a voice stopped me. "Family only, sweetheart," my cousin Trina said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. I forced a nod and stepped back. My seat was next to the portable restroom. The smell of disinfectant mixed with perfume and flowers made my stomach turn. From there, I could see everything and nothing all at once. My family in perfect alignment, while I sat in exile, pretending it didn't matter. A few people glanced my way, maybe out of pity, maybe out of confusion, but no one offered their seat. And why would they? Grace was the perfect daughter, the one who stayed close, did the charity work, called every Sunday. I was the one who left, the one who questioned, the one who didn't play along. I tried not to look at Mom, but my eyes betrayed me. She was holding a lavender handkerchief, folded neatly in her palm. I recognized it immediately. I'd given it to her for Mother's Day when I was 16, after saving tips from my part-time job at the diner. I'd embroidered her initials myself. Now, she pressed it delicately against her cheek, catching a tear that wasn't there. People saw grace in that gesture. I saw performance. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I'd learned years ago that tears changed nothing in our family. They were just seen as weakness, or worse, manipulation. So, I sat still, hands folded, face blank, pretending the sound of the hymns didn't make my chest ache. After the service, people drifted away, murmuring condolences that sounded rehearsed. The sun had already dipped behind the trees when I noticed my parents were still there. I stayed hidden near the fence, half in shadow. Mom knelt beside the grave, her movements careful, deliberate. Dad handed her the same wooden box, the one he'd lowered earlier. She whispered something I couldn't hear. Together they buried it beside Grace's tombstone, pressing the soil down with their bare hands. I wanted to believe it was sentimental, a time capsule, maybe letters or photos. But the way Mom's eyes darted around before standing, the way she brushed her palms together like wiping off evidence, it didn't feel sentimental. It felt secret. They left without looking back. The cemetery was nearly empty now, except for the wind and the faint squeak of the gate as it swung. I hesitated, then stepped forward. The moonlight caught the corner of the grave, the spot where the box was buried. I stared at the ground, at the fresh dirt, darker than the rest. Then I heard it. A soft sound. A faint tap, like someone drumming fingers inside a coffin. I froze. The air thickened in my chest. It came again, barely audible, but real enough to send a shiver through me. "Maybe it's just settling," I whispered, my own voice shaking. But something deep in me, the part that still wanted to believe in truth, wouldn't let me walk away. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the soil. It was still warm. I don't know what possessed me, but I started digging. My nails tore against the dirt. The smell of earth filled my nose. Each handful made my pulse race faster. When my fingers hit wood, I stopped breathing. I clawed the rest of it free and pulled the box out. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "Please," I whispered, voice cracking. "Please, don't be empty." The latch creaked when I opened it. Whatever was inside caught the moonlight for a split second. Something pale, something impossible. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, the box slipping from my hands. The night swallowed the sound of it hitting the ground. She wasn't supposed to open it, but she did. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared, at the tape, at the box, at the dirt on my hands that didn't belong there. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out right there next to Grace's grave. It was a cassette tape. Old, worn, barely legible, but someone had written across the label in black ink, "Don't trust what they told you." The handwriting looked rushed, familiar. I closed the box with shaking fingers and clutched it to my chest. The walk back to my car felt longer than it should have been. The wind had picked up, brushing past the trees like a warning. I got in, locked the doors, and sat in the driver's seat for nearly 10 minutes, trying to breathe. I drove home in silence, the tape sitting on the passenger seat like it was watching me. Every few minutes, I glanced at it, wondering if it might disappear. If this whole thing was some stress-induced hallucination, but it stayed there, quiet and real. Back home, the lights in the hallway were off. I moved carefully, slipping off my shoes at the door and heading straight for Grace's room. We hadn't touched it since the funeral 2 years ago. Not a picture moved, not a single drawer emptied. It was still hers, untouched, unlived. The doorknob turned without resistance. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, vanilla and gardenia. It hit me like a memory I hadn't invited. The bed was still made, the curtains drawn halfway. Her books lined the shelves, her high school trophies gathered dust. And then there it was, on the top shelf, a cassette player. I grabbed it, surprised it hadn't been tossed out, popped in the tape, pressed play. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice. It wasn't Grace. "You promised. No one must ever know what happened that night." I froze. It was Mom, not her soft Sunday voice. Not the one she used at Bible study or around neighbors. This one was colder, controlled, like someone rehearsing a lie they'd told too many times. I hit pause. My hands were slick with sweat. I rewound the tape and played it again, this time closing my eyes. "You promised. No one must ever know what happened that night." It wasn't a sermon, not a voicemail, not anything that could be explained away easily. Still, my mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was part of some old church play. Maybe she was recording something for the women's ministry. Maybe I was imagining the whole thing. That's what grief does, right? It rewrites sound. It bends time. But then I remembered. Grace. Her last words to me, weeks before the accident. "If anything happens to me, don't believe the story they tell." I had laughed back then, told her she watched too many crime shows. Now her words felt like a rope thrown across time, begging me to pull. I took the tape downstairs. The house was dark except for the dining room lamp. Mom was sitting at the table, folding that same lavender handkerchief, Neat, perfect folds, like always. "Mom," I said, my voice thin. "What is this tape?" She didn't look up, didn't stop folding. "Asha," she said, like my name was a sigh. "Some things are better buried." I waited. "It was your voice on there." She finally glanced at me, just for a second. No guilt, just tiredness. Then she looked away. Behind her, Dad, Darren, stepped in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He saw the cassette in my hand and paled. "Honey," he said softly, "let it go, please." There it was, the hierarchy, the unspoken rules. Mom spoke, Dad echoed, I questioned, they closed ranks. I didn't say another word, just turned and went upstairs. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan. Its blades moved in slow circles, like a clock stuck between minutes. Somewhere down the hall, I imagined Grace's room, the cassette player, the tape, still spinning, still whispering things I didn't understand yet. I remembered her laugh. It used to ring out of that same room like a wind chime in summer, sudden, clear, beautiful. Now it was just an echo in my head, fragile and far away. My phone buzzed. It was almost midnight. Unknown number. My stomach knotted. I hit play. The voicemail started with static, then a voice, her voice. "Don't let them bury it again." The voice on that voicemail wasn't just Grace's. It was begging me to finish what she started. Sleep didn't come. I laid there with my phone still in my hand, Grace's voice playing on a loop in my mind. It wasn't just eerie, it was intentional, urgent. Like she knew I'd be the one to find it. By the time the sun started bleeding through the curtains, my head ached from the weight of it all. I slipped out of bed without waking anyone, threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, and grabbed the keys to Dad's old truck. Mine was still out of gas, and I didn't feel like seeing anyone at the station. The drive to the cemetery was quiet, just the faint hum of tires on gravel and my heartbeat thumping in my ears. I parked on the side of the hill, just far enough away to not draw attention. The air smelled like warm clay and wet grass, heavy with dew. I walked up the slope toward Grace's grave, every step echoing louder in the silence. But something was off. Even before I reached it, I felt it, like a shift in the air, a warning hanging over me. Then I saw it. The soil. It had been turned. The patch I dug last night, where I'd uncovered that box, it wasn't how I left it. The top layer looked smoothed over, but the shape was wrong. The color, the texture. Someone had been here. I knelt down, fingers trembling, and brushed the surface. It was softer than it should have been, fresher. My nails dug in, scraping through the loose dirt. A sharp smell hit me. Gasoline. Just faint, but there. And under it, another wilted lavender. Whoever came after me had tried to bury something again, or hide what I'd found. I dug faster, shallow scoops, just enough to feel beneath the surface. And then, wood. No, not the box. Splinters, shards of it. Broken apart and pushed deeper into the ground. The cassette was gone. My stomach flipped. Someone had watched. Someone knew. I sat back, dirt clinging to my jeans, staring at the disturbed earth like it might offer an explanation. But it didn't. Just silence. Then I heard footsteps. I turned sharply, ready to lie, ready to run, but it was a man. Maybe late 50s, flannel shirt, jeans, boots. He held a thermos in one hand, a shovel in the other. "Morning," he said, too casual. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Ms. Klein." He knew my name. "Do I know you?" I asked, standing. He nodded toward the maintenance shed. "Elliot Grant, groundskeeper. Been here 12 years. I waited. He didn't explain the way he watched me, his eyes darting from my hands to the shallow hole beside the grave. "Did you see anyone out here last night?" I asked. He took a sip from his thermos. Too long a pause. "People grieve in strange ways," he finally said, Best not to go digging in things meant to stay put. It wasn't a warning, it was a suggestion. I left the grave as it was, brushed the dirt from my palms, and walked back toward the truck. Elliot didn't follow, just stood there, staring at Grace's headstone like it owed him an answer. When I opened the driver's door, I felt something in my jacket pocket. I didn't remember putting anything there. I reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Photocopy. Old, faded. But the heading was clear. Davidson County Medical Examiner. Grace Klein. Autopsy report. There was a note in pencil along the margin, almost invisible. Ask why there was no water in her lungs. The ground felt like it tilted beneath me. They said she drowned. All this time, drowned. That was the story. That was what they told me. Told the church, told themselves. But now... I sat in the truck for a long while before driving. I don't even remember the route home. Everything I passed, mailboxes, picket fences, gas stations, they all looked fake. Like the whole town had been painted on, like a movie set. At a red light, I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, lips dry. I didn't look scared, I looked betrayed. I pulled into our driveway. The house looked too still, like it was bracing for something. When I walked in, the smell of breakfast hit me. Eggs, toast, and that lingering hint of lavender. Always lavender. Dad was already at the table. He looked up before I said a word. A cup of coffee in front of him. The lavender handkerchief folded neatly beside it. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't need to. "Your mother tells me you've been digging," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes, they weren't tired. They were red, not from tears, from fear. I stayed standing. "Where's the tape, Dad?" He didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his hand tightened around the coffee mug. And in that silence, everything shifted. The man who used to read bedtime stories, who held my hand when I was sick, he was gone, replaced by someone who was choosing silence, choosing secrets, choosing her. Dad's voice shook as he spoke, but what scared me most wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't deny. Dad's voice still echoed in my head long after he left the kitchen. He hadn't denied a thing, just looked at me like a man already drowning. I sat there, staring at the lavender handkerchief he'd left behind, folded too neatly, too deliberately, like a symbol of everything we never said out loud. That night, the house felt colder than usual. Every clock ticked louder, every floorboard creaked like it was warning me to stay quiet. Around 7, I heard the clinking of silverware from the dining room. I knew what that sound meant. Mom was setting the table. When she set the table, it wasn't for dinner, it was for control. I walked in slowly. The candles were lit, the plates aligned perfectly. Not a single napkin out of place. Mom sat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her expression soft but staged. The lavender handkerchief rested beside her wine glass like a signature. Dad sat opposite her, silent, pretending to read the newspaper that hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. I stood by the doorway. "We're having this conversation because I'm worried about your mental health, Asha," Mom began. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. It wasn't concern, it was strategy. I almost laughed. "My mental health?" "You've been under tremendous stress," she continued, ignoring my tone. "Grief can twist things. You've been seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't real. The mind can create monsters when it needs someone to blame." Dad's eyes stayed glued to his paper. "Monsters," I repeated quietly. "Like a cassette tape with your voice on it? That kind of monster?" Mom sighed, the sound deliberate and heavy, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Asha, sweetheart, that's what I mean. You're remembering things wrong. You've always been sensitive." I felt the room tighten. It wasn't grief they were trying to fix. It was me. I'd seen this before, growing up, how she'd turn any accusation into concern, how Dad would sit there, a spectator in his own marriage, silently complicit. "You know," I said slowly, "I spent most of my life trying to earn your approval, but tonight I'm realizing you've spent yours trying to erase me." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she reached for the handkerchief, wiping a spot on the table that didn't exist. It was her tell. Every time she lied, she had to make something spotless. Before she could speak again, the doorbell rang. We all froze. Dad stood halfway, like he was relieved to escape, but Mom raised a hand. "I'll get it," she said sharply. I followed her into the hallway. When she opened the door, the last person I expected was standing there. Elliot Grant, the cemetery caretaker. He looked uncomfortable, holding a manila envelope. "Evening, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Ms. Klein, you left this near your sister's grave." I stepped forward. "I didn't." Mom's smile tightened. "That's impossible. My daughter hasn't been to the cemetery since the burial." Elliot hesitated, glancing between us. Then, with a quiet firmness that surprised me, he handed the envelope directly to me. "Maybe you should check for yourself." Mom's face went still. The air changed, heavier, like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't unsee. I took the envelope and thanked him. He nodded once and left without another word. Mom shut the door slowly, her movements sharp and contained. "Asha," she said softly, "I hope you understand that digging into the past won't bring her back." I didn't answer. I just walked back to the table and opened the envelope. Inside were copies of documents, Grace's death certificate, a short police report, and 2 photographs. One showed a close-up of a bruised wrist, faint finger marks visible beneath the skin. The other, a grainy image of my mother, standing by the lake dock the night Grace supposedly drowned. The air left my lungs. I looked up. Mom's mask slipped for half a second. Her hand trembled as she reached for the wine glass, but missed it by an inch. "You think you understand everything," she whispered, "but you don't know what I was protecting." Her voice cracked on that last word. Protecting. Not defending. Protecting. I set the papers down, staring straight at her. "Then tell me before I find out without you." Silence filled the room, the kind that hums beneath your skin. Dad stood suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. "I can't do this," he muttered, heading toward the stairs. He didn't look back. I stayed seated. The candles flickered. Mom folded her handkerchief, one perfect corner at a time, like she was rebuilding her armor. She looked up, her voice barely audible. "You think she was innocent, Asha, but we buried the wrong daughter." For a moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe, because I wasn't sure what she meant, until the way she looked at me made it clear. She didn't mean it metaphorically. Those words haunted me all night. They looped in my head like a broken tape, each repetition digging deeper until I couldn't tell if I was still dreaming or awake. We buried the wrong daughter. By morning, the light that filtered through my blinds felt foreign, too bright, too revealing. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the quiet hum of the house. The air smelled faintly of lavender, just like it always did after Mom's Sunday cleaning routine. But now, that scent made my stomach twist. I finally got up and wandered toward Grace's old room. The door creaked open like it had been waiting for me. Dust hung in the air, floating in the soft sunlight that slipped through the lace curtains. Her room hadn't changed. Same floral comforter, same posters, same faint trace of her perfume. I sat on the edge of her bed and whispered into the stillness. What did she mean, Grace? I started going through the dresser drawers, half expecting to find nothing but old letters or folded church bulletins. I didn't even know what I was looking for, just something, anything that might make sense of what my mother said. That's when I heard it, a small, sharp creak from beneath my feet. I knelt and ran my hand across the floorboards. One plank felt looser than the rest. I pressed down on one end, and it lifted slightly. My breath caught. Underneath was a small bundle wrapped in fabric. Lavender print. I pulled it out, my fingers shaking. Inside was a faded journal, the leather cracked and fragile. Grace's handwriting covered the first page, rounded, neat, patient. The early entries were harmless enough. Notes about school, youth group meetings, mentions of her boyfriend, Daniel. Nothing unusual. But halfway through, the tone shifted. The lines grew messy, rushed, desperate. Mom said if I tell, she'll make sure no one believes me. She said I've already ruined enough. My heart started pounding. I turned the page. She thinks I don't know what's really going on with Dad's foundation project. But I've seen the receipts. I've heard the calls. They're moving money through the church like no one will ever notice, but people always notice eventually. I froze. I could almost hear Grace's voice, clear as the day she used to sing hymns in the kitchen. Page after page unraveled the truth. She'd found something about Dad's business, something tied to the church's charity fund, money disappearing, accounts that didn't add up. And the last few entries were nothing short of terrified. Mom says it's all for God's work, that I shouldn't question what I don't understand. But what if she's lying too? I turned to the final page. The date was 2 days before she died. If something happens to me, tell Asha to look under the lavender tree. I dropped the journal. My chest felt hollow. Outside, through the window, I could see the lavender tree, its branches heavy and full, swaying lightly in the morning breeze. That tree had been there since before I was born. Grace and I used to sit under it every summer, pretending its shade was a secret fort. Now, it looked like a grave marker. I grabbed a small garden spade from the shed and walked out to the tree. The soil was hard at first, stubborn, but I kept digging until the blade struck something metal. I pulled it out, a rusted tin box, sealed tight. It took me a minute to pry it open, but when I did, I found photographs inside. One was of Mom and Grace at a church event, both smiling. But Grace's wrist was wrapped in a bandage. I hadn't noticed that before. The second photo was more recent, a shot of Mom standing near the lake dock, nighttime. Her face caught in the flash, half shadow, half guilt. There was also a folded receipt inside. I smoothed it open. It showed a transfer, money wired from the church's charity account to a private account under Marjorie Klein. My throat closed up. For years, I thought my mother's faith made her strong. Now I saw it for what it really was, a shield. Faith hadn't made her righteous. It had made her untouchable. As I stood there, the air around me changed. A sound, soft, deliberate, came from the porch. I turned. Dad was standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes red and sunken. He didn't yell, didn't ask what I was doing. He just looked at me like someone who'd already given up. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said quietly. I didn't move. "You knew." He nodded once, slowly. "I knew." "Then why?" My voice broke. "Why lie? Why let her do this?" He looked down at the ground, his voice trembling. "Because sometimes protecting the truth hurts more than burying it." I stared at him, gripping the tin until my knuckles ached. "She killed her." He didn't answer, just stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper now. "Grace didn't drown, Asha," he said. "She fell." The world seemed to tilt beneath me, the words echoing until they didn't sound human anymore. I thought I'd found the truth. But what my father said next made me wish I hadn't dug at all. I didn't understand what he meant until I followed him into the garage. The rain had picked up, thick drops pelting the roof as we moved wordlessly through the back door. The house behind us felt like it belonged to someone else now. Like I'd outgrown a skin that had never quite fit. The garage was cold and dark, the kind of silence that breathes louder than any voice. I hadn't stepped in there since I was a kid. It used to be Dad's sanctuary, his woodworking shed where he built birdhouses and fixed squeaky drawers. Now it was a graveyard of old furniture, broken picture frames, boxes labeled Christmas and Summer Camp 1998 in Mom's neat cursive. He moved toward the far corner without a word, pulling a heavy tarp aside. Beneath it was a metal trunk, large, dented, and sealed with a rusted padlock. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small key, and slid it in. The lock gave easily. He lifted the lid slowly, like the thing inside could bite. The smell hit me first: cedar, oil, and something else. Age, secrets. He stepped back, giving me space to see for myself. Inside were 2 envelopes, yellowed and thick. One said, Grace. The other, Asha. I picked up mine, staring at the handwriting on the front. It wasn't Mom's. It was his. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first thing inside was a birth certificate. I blinked, then blinked again. The name under Mother wasn't Marjorie Klein. Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What is this? He didn't answer right away, just kept his eyes on the floor, like it hurt to look at me. You were adopted, he finally said. You were just a baby. Grace knew. She wasn't supposed to tell you. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly the concrete floor was beneath me and the air had gone thin. I thought about every dinner where I felt like the outsider. Every Christmas card where my name seemed like an afterthought. Every time Mom looked at me like I was temporary. The other envelope. I opened it with shaky fingers. Inside were receipts, photocopies, and handwritten notes, documents that showed Grace had been collecting proof of Mom's embezzlement, of the transfers from the church's charity account to private funds. She'd found it all. And she'd told someone, maybe me, maybe someone else. Maybe she thought she had time. I looked up at Dad. What happened to her? I asked, my voice stripped raw. He finally met my eyes. It was an argument, he said. Your mother lost control. Grace said she'd go public. She threatened everything. And you helped cover it up. His silence said more than any confession ever could. I stood up slowly, the envelope still in my hand. My knees were weak, but something in me had solidified. Some root, deep and unshakable. The kind of strength that doesn't come from faith or blood, but from truth. For years, I said, I begged for her love, for yours. But I was never your daughter. I was your cover story. His lips parted like he wanted to protest, but nothing came out. I walked to the door. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. I stepped out into it, the cold soaking through my shirt instantly. I didn't care. Back in the car, I sat for a minute. My breath fogged up the windows. The lavender handkerchief sat on the passenger seat where I'd left it, still folded, but now stained with mud and my own tears. I looked at the envelopes again, then at my reflection in the rearview mirror. They'd built an entire life on silence, on image, on pretending. But the silence was cracking now. I wasn't here to play their part anymore. I took out my phone, hands still damp. I wasn't sure who I was going to call. Maybe a journalist, maybe the police, maybe both. But then a message popped up on my screen. Unknown number. Don't make the same mistake Grace did. I stared at it, heart pounding. So I wasn't the only one. Someone else had been watching? That thought stuck with me all night, like a weight pressing against my ribs. I barely slept. Every shadow in the apartment felt too long, every sound outside like a footstep coming closer. By morning, the storm hadn't stopped. The rain beat against the windows, steady and hard, as if the world itself was trying to drown out the truth I'd uncovered. I was drinking cold coffee, staring blankly at the envelopes from the garage, when my laptop chimed. A new email, no sender, no subject, just one line. For your eyes only. For a full minute, I just stared at it. My cursor hovered over the message, my heartbeat loud enough to fill the room. Every instinct told me not to open it, but curiosity always wins over fear, doesn't it? When I clicked, the message revealed a single attachment, a video file, and below it, just one sentence. If you want peace, stop digging. I hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered, shaky footage coming into focus. Grace's face appeared, pale, wind-blown, eyes darting nervously toward the camera. She was sitting near the lake, the same lake where they said she drowned. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "If anything happens to me," she said, "it's not an accident. Mom's been moving money through the foundation. Dad knows. They said they'll handle it." Her eyes shifted suddenly. Headlights appeared behind her, glowing faintly through the trees. She turned, whispering, "That's them." Then the screen went black. My hand froze on the trackpad. The timestamp at the corner of the video read 10:47 p.m., the night before she died. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Then I played it again and again, hoping I'd misheard her voice, hoping it wasn't what it was. On the fourth replay, the screen glitched. The sound stuttered, then stopped. The video shut off by itself, and a new message popped up in bold white letters. "Delete it, or the next grave will have your name." I stared at the words. My stomach dropped. And then the lights went out. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The clock on the microwave blinked out. Only the rain outside kept moving, whispering against the glass. For a long time, I sat perfectly still, listening to the dark. That old, familiar fear crept back in. The one I thought I'd buried along with my sister. The fear of being unseen, unheard, erased. Then, beneath the fear, came something else. Realization. Whoever sent that threat had access to Grace's phone, which meant it wasn't some random hacker or stranger. It was someone close, someone who knew exactly what I'd found. I turned the laptop back on using the battery power. The warning message was gone, but the video file was still there, half corrupted, frozen on Grace's face mid-breath. For a moment, I reached toward the delete key, but then I stopped. "No," I whispered, "not this time." I opened my email again and searched through Grace's old files on the flash drive. One name kept appearing in her notes: Rachel Dorsey, an attorney who worked with whistleblowers and church reform cases. I attached the video, wrote just one line: "If I go missing, start with the Klein Foundation." Then I hit send. After that, I downloaded the video onto a flash drive, the same one that used to hold my college photos. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and grabbed my car keys. The rain outside hadn't slowed, but I didn't care. "They've buried truth for years," I said out loud, my voice shaking but steady. "And I've been their favorite grave." As I stepped outside, thunder rolled low and long in the distance. I got into my car, engine humming beneath the storm's rhythm, and glanced at the lavender handkerchief still on the passenger seat. I wasn't sure if it comforted or cursed me anymore. I started the car. The headlights cut through the rain like twin knives. But then I saw it, a shape standing near the entrance of my apartment building. A man. He didn't move, didn't raise a hand, just stood there, soaked through, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. My breath caught when I recognized him. Elliot Grant, the cemetery caretaker. He stepped closer, slowly, until the headlights revealed something glinting in his hand. Not a shovel this time, a badge. He smiled, a calm, practiced smile, and said the one thing that made my blood turn to ice. "Your sister wasn't the first." Those 5 words hit harder than the rain pelting my windshield as I sped down the road, barefoot, soaked, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out. But I didn't run from Elliot. I didn't even care what his badge meant. I ran toward the only place left that could still hold answers: the Klein mansion. The storm had swallowed the town whole by the time I reached the estate. Thunder cracked like bones splitting open, and lightning lit the long driveway in flashes. Brief glimpses of the house I once called home. The front door was ajar. I stepped inside slowly, water pooling beneath me on the polished floors. The air was thick with mildew and memory. The power was out. Somewhere a clock ticked, stubbornly holding on. Then I saw her. Marjorie stood at the base of the staircase, a candle in hand. Not surprised, not startled, just waiting, like she knew I'd come, like she'd lit the candle for this exact moment. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. Her voice was soft, cold. "You shouldn't have lied," I said, shutting the door behind me. She didn't flinch, just stared. "I did what I had to do." "For who? For Grace? For me?" I stepped closer. My clothes clung to me, hair dripping down my back. I held up the flash drive, placed it on the hallway table between us. "The world's about to hear your version of doing what had to be done." Something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but realization. "You already sent it," she whispered, "to Rachel Dorsey. You remember her, right? Grace did." Marjorie's hand trembled slightly. The candle flickered. She looked older in that light, smaller. "She wasn't supposed to die," she said, voice cracking. "Grace, she was reckless. She found things she shouldn't have. And when she came at me, screaming, waving those papers..." My breath caught. "She tried to grab them from my hands. I didn't push her. She fell." My stomach turned. "Dad wanted to call the police," she continued. "Said it was an accident. But I knew it would all come out. About the foundation, about you, about the adoption, everything. I couldn't let that happen." She looked up at me, eyes shining with something that wasn't remorse. "You were supposed to save us, Asha. You were the quiet one, the good one." I stepped back. "No," I said. "I was your cover story." Behind me, the floor creaked. I turned. Darren stood at the end of the hallway, soaked from the rain, holding a gun in both hands. It trembled. So did he. "She can't ruin us again," he said, not to me, but to Marjorie. His voice cracked on again. Marjorie's eyes widened. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Darren, put that down." He didn't move. "Everything we built," he mumbled, eyes glassy. "Gone in seconds. Because of what? The truth?" I stood between them, unsure who the gun was. 4. Lightning flashed, a blinding white. A shot rang out. I didn't know who fired. For a second, I couldn't tell if I was still standing. Then the gun clattered to the floor. Marjorie dropped to her knees. Not from pain, from the weight of it all. Her hands were empty. Darren sank against the wall, face pale, tears mixing with rain on his cheeks. I picked up the phone from the hallway table and dialed 911. My fingers shook, but my voice didn't. "There's been a shooting at the Klein residence. Send help." The operator said something. I didn't hear it. I looked at my parents. One collapsed in silence. The other curled up like a child who'd just been scolded. I walked to the door, stepping back into the downpour. The lavender handkerchief was still in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. It was soaked, muddied, ruined. I didn't care. It no longer represented her. It was mine now, whatever that meant. Sirens howled in the distance. Red and blue soon lit up the windows behind me. I didn't look back. "For years," I whispered, "I thought silence kept peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace. It's a grave with fresh flowers." I stood at the edge of the driveway as the police rushed in. EMTs passed me. Someone called my name. I didn't respond. Dawn was breaking. The storm was finally beginning to let go. An officer approached from the house. His voice was low. "Ma'am, we found something in the basement. Another box." I turned to face him. "It's smaller, older," he added. "It's marked with your name." I stared at the box the officer held out. Wrapped in a dirty linen cloth, damp and smelling of soil, it looked like something pulled from another lifetime. My name was faintly carved into the wood, ASHA, each letter trembling as if the knife that cut them had known what this moment would mean. I took it in both hands. It was surprisingly light, but the weight it carried settled into my chest. The front lawn was littered with police tape and tire tracks. Cameras had already started arriving, their lenses angled like accusations. I moved past them, past the porch steps where I used to wait for Grace to come home from school, and found the quietest spot I could, under the overhang by the garden bench. The storm had finally moved on. All that was left was the hush that comes after truth explodes. I sat down. The wood of the bench was slick with rain, but I didn't care. With a slow breath, I peeled the cloth away. The box was old, the hinges rusted and squeaking as I opened it. Inside were papers, letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age and bundled with twine. I untied them carefully, afraid they might crumble if I moved too fast. The first one had no date, only this line at the top. "To the daughter I'll never get to hold." My throat closed up. Her handwriting was delicate, looping, like someone who still believed writing letters could hold the world together. I read them all, one after the other. Her name was Leah, my mother. She worked for the Kleins when she was barely 20. She got pregnant, no father listed. She died giving birth to me. Marjorie took me in. No, that's not right. Marjorie claimed me. She forged adoption papers, told everyone she'd been planning to adopt for years, gave me her name, raised me in silence. And Grace. Grace found the letters years later. She kept them hidden. She tried to tell me, and Marjorie silenced her. "My whole life," I whispered, my fingers trembling. I begged to belong to a family that was never mine. But these letters, these were something else. They weren't demands. They weren't shame. They were love. Pure, wordless, desperate love. A mother's love that never got a chance to bloom. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not anger, not grief, just stillness. The kind that comes after fire has scorched through everything, and there's nothing left to burn. By the time the sun had fully broken through the clouds, I was back at Grace's grave. The sky was clean, the wind soft, the earth damp and welcoming. I knelt down beside the headstone. It was still so new. "I brought something," I whispered. I placed the box in the shallow hole I dug with my bare hands. No secrets this time, no hiding. Just truth being laid to rest, where it belonged. "You weren't empty, Grace," I said. "You were full of truth. You gave me back my name." I covered the box with soil, pressed it down, and stood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Rachel Dorsey. "The investigation's gone public. The Foundation's assets are frozen. It's over." I looked back at the grave. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning." I walked toward the gate, the path no longer feeling so heavy beneath my feet. The air had shifted, less burdened, more alive. As I reached the edge of the cemetery, I heard it. A sound, faint, delicate, laughter. A child's laughter. I stopped, turned. No one was there. But I smiled anyway. Maybe it was memory, maybe something more. Either way, I kept walking into the morning light.